Hello and welcome to another episode of Statford Bridge Chelsea by the numbers, coming at you after a 3-0 win at home to Aston Villa. This was a match Chelsea lost last year, 1-0. They played quite well. Malagusto takes a silly red card, game turns on its head, Bob Sanchez lets in a softie, and that's the game. That was not this game. This game, Chelsea go ahead early through their first real dangerous attack of the game. A lovely Marc Cucurella counterpress turns into a cross that gets deflected, and Nico Jackson kind of finishes instinctively at the near post. Enzo Fernandez is on the end of a very lovely move from Chelsea that, again, is a counter-pressing win from Romeo Lavia this time. Goes into Enzo, bounce to Palmer, back to Enzo, who finishes on the edge of the box. And then Cole Palmer kind of puts the cherry on top with a very lovely finish late in the game. And Chelsea were pretty comfortable in this one. I think this is a game that the XG is a little bit less favorable than the game felt. It's 1.7 to 1.2, 17 shots to 10, 32 box touches to 19. All the sorts of things we look at. It's even on the big chances. Villa really get two very noteworthy moments, right? One is the Ollie Watkins save where Villa play a speculative ball over the top that comes out of Chelsea's defensive structure, and Wesley Fofana gets caught being a little bit cute, leads to a Watkins 1v1. Rob Sanchez makes a great save. There's another one kind of off a set piece towards the end from John Duran that I think is not a great chance. There's a couple of stuff off set pieces. There's a Watkins chance off of a cutback right at the end of the first half that is like a critical turning point where if it's 2-1 going in to halftime, things feel very, very different. And on the other end, Chelsea didn't create like a huge amount, but you have things like the indirect free kick, which don't turn into like an amazing chance when it feels like maybe they should. Martinez passes it to Nico Jackson. He doesn't get a really good shot off at all. And very often that's a goal. I think this is like a weird one. The expected threat stats on this game were much more even than the XG. But I thought Chelsea were like pretty comfortable. At no point, I went into halftime feeling quite tenuous in terms of, I don't think Chelsea have been 2-0 good here, and Villa have gotten sniffs. Like, if they get one, this will get pretty tense pretty quick. But at no point in the second half did it really feel like Villa were ever going to score. And it certainly didn't feel like their subs had any real juice to accelerate the game or make the game more difficult for Chelsea. And I think this is one of the reasons why I was so high on Chelsea going into this year in terms of top four qualification compared to Villa and compared to Spurs and compared to United and compared to Newcastle, and now Brighton are in this picture, is that these teams did not have the ability to cope with the volume of matches that they have. And given the European matches that Chelsea have to play are of such a lower standard than both Villa and Spurs that Chelsea were able to rotate much more effectively, and it would mean that their players for the league games would be much fresher. And that has very much come to pass, that Villa are very thin and they look very tired in all of their games. Similarly, Spurs are very thin. Many of their starters are injured and or suspended for racismo. And they can't hang with the demands of their Europa League and the league, where they drop points to Fulham this weekend. And so I think like Chelsea are in a pretty good spot and thus far are taking good advantage of it. But that's kind of the story of the game statistically. I think the most interesting thing to talk about is we saw something very different, something we haven't seen so far this season from Chelsea. The first is that Moises Caicedo played right back. And with Caicedo playing right back, what we saw was Palmer became a right 10, Enzo shifted high, Lavia shifted over, and Moy came in. And we still got the same three. We still got the 3-box-3. There was a lot of talk before the game. I think CFC Central Sam was talking about he thought it would be a 3-diamond 3. So something like this, or the like 3-1-6-1 we've seen. But it ended up being very much 3-box-3 still. And I think one of the things that Chelsea got a lot of joy with in this game in particular is they would bring the ball. So Villa played very, very dense centrally, super narrow, super narrow, really to try and deny the central avenues to progress and really to deny Levi Colwill's ability to break the lines. And what we saw from Chelsea as a solution to this is that you would have, when the ball went to Marc Cucurella, you would have Jackson come over, you would have Sancho start low to bring the winger, and then when the winger engaged, Sancho would come out, Lavia would come into the pocket, and Enzo would come all the way wide. So if this winger doesn't take a perfect angle, where either he takes away Lavia or he takes away Enzo, we were able to play around and advance this way, where Enzo and Jadon Sancho, who I didn't think had a great game, but were like very, Jadon Sancho specifically, I thought Enzo had a very good game, were very, very key avenues for Chelsea to advance the ball into the final third. And then this opened up a lot of options in terms of like, if you play Lavia, can you break the line this way? Or if you play Caicedo, can you break the line through Palmer? And I thought Chelsea were very stable. I think they had one bad turnover to a very, very organized Villa middle block. If you look at the Mark R stats, like dangerous turnover stats, Chelsea only turned it over in their third like 14 times the whole game. And they generated 25 or 26 themselves, which we'll talk about. Their average this season has been like 25 to 27 turnovers in their third a game. So to drop that by 10, they did quite a good job, I thought, of not really getting turned over. And particularly, I think part of why the last half of the game or the last third of the game felt so secure is that I thought Chelsea were very smart about not letting the game speed up and not giving Villa turnovers to accelerate off of. It was very calm, a lot of slow, like not effective as a means of progression passing, but effective as like taking a lot of the air out of the game. Chelsea's possessions were very long comparatively. So I think that was a big key. The other side of this that we saw was we saw a big change in defensive shape from Chelsea. So Villa play a 4-2-3-1 that is really just a 4-4-2 with a big guy and a little guy in Rodgers and Watkins, and they're like the same size, but Watkins plays much more nominally the big guy, and Rodgers is much more nominally the little guy. And what happens is basically when they build, they end up in like a back three and then a four with the fullbacks, the 2 6s, and then a 4 with the wingers, the 9s and the 10s. And this is basically always how it looks. And what we saw from Chelsea was that normally we would see Chelsea handle someone like this, building 4-4-2, with the 9s on the 6s, the wingers man mark the fullbacks, and then the double 6s and Lavia and Enzo manage, and it's 4-4-2, 4-2-4. And when the ball goes, one of them steps, the 6 jumps, and the center back follows super, super aggressively. That's how Chelsea have defended all season. What we saw this time was very different. We saw Chelsea defend in what was a 4-1-4-1. Lavia was free to pick up whoever he saw. The wingers and the fullbacks still marked, but you saw much more jumping from the fullback to the center back. There were a lot of times that Neto gambles to leave. There were a lot of times that Sancho's gambles to leave. It was much more common on that side because we had a clear skew from Nico Jackson and from Chelsea to force Villa to build through Pau Torres on the left. I don't know what they recognized there because it was Tielemans was the left and Boubacar Kamara, who did not have a great game, was the right 6. Right? I don't think these are accurate, but it looked basically like this. You had McGinn as the width holder on the left. You had Tielemans, you had Kamara, you had Pau Torres, you had Digne. And Chelsea were very, very deliberate about Jackson would sit on the line between the 6 and the center back. and he would slowly close, and he would slowly close, and this was exactly how the chance where Martinez comes to him. And then when they would pass, he would come and he would lock, and Torres would be encouraged to dribble or to try and play. And I don't know if this is something Enzo Maresca acknowledged or recognized, or his analysts or staff saw, like Villa are much less effective when they build down the left. But we saw a lot of situations where it ended up here, and it was just grenades into the channel for them to chase nothing. And I think one of the things that really shined with Chelsea defending this way was, one, Villa had very little success playing through midfield. And now Villa are not the most oppressive possession team ever, but they had very little success playing through midfield. And the second is that Chelsea were very comfortable with a lot of situations with Colwill and Fofana following into crazy spaces, and being 2v2 for kind of aimless long balls a lot. And that's how Villa's big chance comes, right? Is it's a hopeless ball into the channel. Fofana gets a little bit too cute about trying to keep it, and Watkins pips him for it. But we also saw a million long balls that they just flick back to Sanchez with nobody near them, or they play a knockdown into midfield where Chelsea are +1 and they pick up the loose ball and go from there. And so I think this 4-1-4-1 was a really clever tweak. I thought it worked quite well. I thought Chelsea's press was very good. They had a couple very dangerous high ball wins, but they had a couple extremely close misses of in the second half. There was one Olsen is passing it along his goal line to try and get out, and they can't. There's Konsa shielding it in his own corner flag from a goal kick because Chelsea's press was so good. And we saw that in the PPDA. Chelsea's PPDA was 7, which is their lowest of the season. So I thought that was particularly interesting, that they were very much able to press Villa and stop them from getting on the ball and really dominate the ball and really control the game. I think this is the first game, maybe not the first game, but one of the first games where we've talked about control on and off the ball, and it was very true for this specific match. And I thought that was a really interesting development. And I'm very curious to see if we see a little bit more of this, because we really haven't at all until this point. I think maybe for 15 minutes against Inter in preseason. So I'll be very curious to see if that arrow comes back out of the quiver. In terms of what this means going forward, there's a lot to like. Again, if we look at the year-over-year comparison stuff, we're 13 matches in at this point. You're a third of the season in, a little bit over a third of the season. You are, again, 2/3 of an expected goal better. You are almost a goal and a half of actual goal difference per game better. You are, when you take out penalties, it's a huge, actually I don't even think this is taking out penalties. It's a huge swing. Expected goals, better. Expected goals against, better. Shot for, you're up +2. Shots against, you're -3.5. Every week this shot differential goes up and up and up, and you play Southampton this week, who are porous and give up lots of shots. You play Spurs, who give up lots of shots. And to be fair, Spurs take a lot of shots. We'll see how that game goes, but it's becoming increasingly clear that the floor for this team at both ends is pretty high when everyone is available. The box touch differential, now you're up to +6 on the box differential, where you were -5 the year previous. It's almost +11 in terms of box touches. And the thing that I think is particularly interesting, this got brought up on stream by, I think Wasa was asking, are Chelsea actually lower variance as well? If you look at the spread of their performance, the variance in their performances, are they a lower variance team? And in terms of things like expected goals and expected goals against, defensively, yes. Offensively, no. But these are small enough differences, I would say it's just the same. What's more interesting to me is that your lower variance in shots, your lower variance in shots against, your lower variance in box touches, your lower variance in box touches against, right? The standard deviation of those values across all the games so far are much smaller. And now it's only 13 games. It's not 40 games. I don't know exactly what the error bars on something like this are, but it feels accurate to say that Chelsea are playing a lower variance style, that the way they play in terms of trying to slow it down a bit and trying to create attacking chances a little bit more stably than like throwing the ball forward and throwing people forward, I think is legitimately resulting in much lower variance performances. And on one hand, like, that can be boring. It can also be somewhat negative in terms of limiting your ceiling. But I think given Chelsea are better than, I don't know, 16 other teams, like, you should play in a way that ensures you are better than the 16 other teams. I think that's a valid way to approach a 38-game season. Regardless, when we look at the chasing pack and kind of the, like, very basic points model of here how many points you have, here how many points you got last year, like, Chelsea are 10 points ahead of last year going into Southampton, Spurs, Brentford, Everton, where they took 4 points last year. I don't think anyone would pick us to take as few as 4 points from these next 4 matches. So, I mean, you look at kind of the next stretch until the new year with Bournemouth and then City, like, here's a real chance for Chelsea to put, like, legitimate points on the board. And, like, I don't know, I don't think it's likely, but if you told me Chelsea were up to, like, 78 or 80 on their projection, like, I could believe it. I don't think I would pick that. Like, I think my kind of, like, vibes-based projection based on where they are now is probably, like, 75, which I think is, like, real meaningful improvement. Just I look at the rest of the year and, like, there's a lot there. And at the same time, like, Spurs dropping points is huge for you. And if we take all of this data into, like, a few contextual factors. So the first is that Chelsea have the hardest strength of schedule of opponents played so far. The winning percentage of opponents played so far is the highest in the league. And again, if you look at the remaining schedule for the rest of the year, right, like, it's Southampton, Spurs, hard game, Brentford, hard game, Everton, Fulham, Ipswich, Palace, like, not exactly a murderer's row before the halfway point. And you're looking at the teams around them, like, Brighton look pretty good. Spurs, not a super hard schedule. United, not a super hard schedule. Like, you're pretty happy with that. And crucially, most excitingly, if we go look at the odds makers, now this is just showing the odds makers for me in Nevada, but, like, you can check this a couple other places. Chelsea are now somewhere between minus 250 and minus 300 on the American odds. That means for you to win $100, you have to bet $250 or $300. And if you put this into an implied probability calculator, that's a 71 to 75% probability of top 4. Opta analyst, 70% chance of top 4. And when you factor in that in the UEFA coefficients, England have to be one of the top 2 teams. Right now, they are second behind Portugal. Given that Liverpool seem to be very, very good, and Arsenal probably very good and well-suited to tournament play, Spurs should make a decent Europa League run. City should also still make a decent Champions League run. Chelsea have the Conference League. Villa, still in the Champions League, could get dropped down to Europa League. There is a preponderance, like a very large probability, higher than 50% probability, that the Premier League will have 5 Champions League places. And if that is the case, I would say Chelsea's Champions League probability is like 90 plus percent. 90 plus percent is where I'm at. So, very exciting weekend with a 3-0 win. We play Southampton on Wednesday. And I suppose that's kind of the place to leave this, is that is a very different game. And it poses a lot of very interesting rotation problems. Wesley Fofana is almost certainly out for that match, given his hamstring problems. Reece James is out for that match. And Southampton are certainly better than most of the Conference League teams Chelsea have played. They're probably better than Heidenheim, who gave Chelsea a difficult-ish game with all B-team players. I will be very, very curious to see who Enzo Maresca plays in that match, because I think we could see 8 rotation, we could see 0 rotation. And I think it's going to be a very interesting decision either direction on that one. Anyways, that is all from me. If you're liking the pod, if you're liking the streams, we had a great stream after the Villa match. Like, subscribe, share, do all that sort of thing. And as always, enjoy the soccer.